Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tensions between Washington and Brussels are escalating after President Trump renewed pressure over Greenland, sending shockwaves through Davos and across European capitals. As EU-US relations strain, questions grow over alliance unity and whether the Greenland row risks diverting Western focus from Ukraine. Joining us is James Batchik. He's Associate Director at the Atlantic Council's Europe Centre. James, welcome to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, since I wrote that, we've had some breaking news in the last few minutes. A post on Truth Social by President Trump, and I'll read out the first couple of sentences and I'll get your view on it. Based on a very productive meeting I had with Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, we've formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. This solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. Based upon this understanding, I'll not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on 1st of February. Now, this throws a completely new light on the circumstance. Your initial thoughts, James?
Yeah, it certainly does change dynamics. The initial thoughts are that this is a good news. It's a positive step that there is some de-escalation happening over Greenland. Those tariffs that President Trump pledged just a few days ago now off the table as negotiations have continued successfully, it seems, with with the United States European allies. Now, on balance, I think this is a positive direction, but it's certainly not over. We'll have to see what exactly this framework is and what it looks like. In previous discussions with Greenlandic and Danish officials just last week in Washington, it looked like a positive direction, and then we took two steps back. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly this framework is. But I would say that this shows that there is a deal to be had where both sides can have some positive developments. By working with our European allies, Washington can benefit from increasing Greenland's defense, while also not taking down the transatlantic relationship in the meantime. And also, finally, I would say it's good that we can get back on track, focusing on the real conflict that's happening in Europe. That is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Greenland episode has, frankly, just been a distraction from unified transatlantic efforts to stop Russia's war.
I want to come back to that particular issue in just a second, but before we get there, James, here's my thought. Even in his speech at Davos today, President Trump was saying, well, we've got to own it because no one else cares enough about protecting Greenland. Why would we care if we didn't have ownership for it? Who wants to protect a license, I think were his exact words. And then suddenly this whole situation changes, and one has to wonder if we can carry on conversations as important as these, which turn on a whim, which is what it seems like, don't you think?
I think that's a fair point, and it gets to the larger issue that this entire Greenland episode was strategically misinformed. It's frankly guided by hubris. There's no real upside to it, and there has been significant damage done. Even though Donald Trump now has said that there will be no military action to take Greenland, there's going to be some significant downside and hurt to the transatlantic relationship and our allies, about the U.S. security guarantor of Europe for a time being uncertain if it might be the one thing that brings violence to Greenland. So I do think you're right. There will be some knock-on frustrations and, frankly, perhaps a lack of trust, which I think gets back to the larger issue that if there were discussions to be had over Greenland, it should have been done diplomatically, and it should have been done by immediately taking military action off the table, because it does make these conversations harder. At the same time, I think for many Europeans, the reality is just that. It's reality. At the end of the day, the United States will be an important partner or an important part of the peace regarding peace in Ukraine. And so that certainly factors into European calculations on whether to engage or confront with President Trump. And that looks like exactly what Secretary General Rutte did today by engaging with President Trump and pushing back where he could. So I think we'll have to see how far this damage really has taken the transatlantic relationship. But hopefully we can get back to focusing on the real issues at hand.
Do you believe that the European Union and European countries generally really need to rethink their expectations of the United States under President Trump? Because who knows when he might pull something like this again? Do they need to be prepared for that eventuality?
I think they should. I certainly think Europe should take these episodes to heart. It really goes back to the need for Europe to work on many of the issues that we've been talking about for a long time. Many analysts, including myself, have been talking about Europe's sovereignty agenda, so Europe's ability to act in its own interests, whether that's defending Ukraine or defending its own territory militarily, or working to de-risk. It's quite unfortunate that Europe's de-risking agenda was really designed with China in mind, but is now taking a swallow and taking a look at the United States. I will say that I think that's the case, but also keeping in mind that the United States and Europe still maintain significant economic ties. This is the largest trade and investment relationship in the world, valued at $1.5 trillion, with FDI accounting for much more than that. So I wouldn't say that there needs to be a wholesale decoupling, but I do think that this is another reminder for Europe and the need to be able to have its own tools and leverage. And at the end of the day, I think a stronger Europe will strengthen the transatlantic relationship. So this could be a wake-up call and a positive development for both sides in the relationship writ large.
Understood. Now let's move to Ukraine. How does this translate to the situation in Ukraine? I mean, Trump has been accused of being too soft on Putin. Putin hasn't backed down from his maximalist demands, and Trump seems to be putting little pressure on him. Do you think that might also evolve?
I certainly hope it evolves in the right direction. You're right. President Trump has been fairly hesitant to call out Vladimir Putin as really the roadblock to peace. He equivocated a bit in his Davos comments today, where he said at certain times both sides, both Ukraine and Russia, have not wanted peace. That's really not the case for the Ukrainians. They have been active over the last year since Donald Trump's presidency to really be president and to push for peace. So I would hope that the administration would realize that the main barrier to peace is, in fact, the Russians. We saw today, or a couple of days ago, Mr. Lavrov reiterating a wholesale rejection of the 20-point peace plan that the United States and Ukraine, with input from the Europeans, have developed. And so really showing that the Russians, again, are the impediments for peace. I think the other issue with the whole Greenland episode has really been to take away from transatlantic coordination on Ukraine. We saw in Davos a meeting with President Zelensky was canceled. He wasn't going to come to Davos. It looks like he is coming for a meeting with President Trump tomorrow on Thursday. But the larger issue on this prosperity plan that was being discussed was really shelved and put on ice because of Greenland, because U.S. and European partners really had to stop and focus on Greenland instead of this much more important issue. So hopefully, with better angels speaking to the administration, we can have much more focus on these issues on Ukraine's security, its economic recovery, and really putting our attention to getting the Russians to negotiate freely.
What would you like to see Europe doing that it's not currently doing to support Ukraine?
Well, I think we should be honest with ourselves. Ukraine is the largest supporter of Ukraine, especially since President Trump came into office. Last year, I believe the Europeans gave somewhere around $200 billion to Ukraine of humanitarian and military aid. So Europe is doing a lot. They also recently are moving forward with the 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine to cover its budgetary gaps for the next 2 years. So I think we should start there. That said, there is a lot more to do. The European and the European Council failed to leverage the 240 billion euro loan that was proposed late last year, leaving some money on the table. 240 billion euros is not 90 billion euros. That's one thing. Then the other thing I think is the coalition of the willing of European countries committing to Ukraine's long-term security. It's made serious positive steps in the right direction since the coalition was founded. But that said, I think there should be more countries actively and publicly committing to putting their forces in Ukraine in some sort of capacity, should there be a peace deal, to really signal their resolve and to signal that Europe is owning Ukraine's long-term security and recovery.
The boots on the ground issue is surely a secondary one. The first issue is actually finding a peace treaty that holds, isn't it? And there seems scant chance of that at the moment.
You're right. And again, that boils down to Russian opposition. The United States and the Ukrainians have fleshed out, they said recently, 90% there on this 20-point plan that's been discussed. Real positive developments. The Europeans are also on board. What you're seeing from the Russians is rejecting this plan out of hand. They've also rejected proposals for energy ceasefires, for example. And during this time, been lobbing massive attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure, leaving hundreds of thousands in Kyiv without power during some of the coldest winters in recent years. This is, I would say, a pretty significant evidence that the Russians are not negotiating. And I would say the Russians are not negotiating because they do not feel there's any pressure to negotiate. So I would say that you're right. Getting to peace is the most important issue right now. And it's one that the European allies with the United States should be focusing on how to turn up the leverage on the Russians in order to get them to negotiate. The Russians are only going to negotiate when the United States and European allies force them to.
Well, we look forward to that happening in the near future, James. Batchik, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, you as well.
Bye-bye. Brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.